My name is Anna, and I'm 31 years old. Last Sunday, at a family party, my widowed mother introduced us to her new husband. Everyone seemed to think he was perfect. He was charming, polite, confident, the kind of man who knows exactly what to say and when to smile. But while he was greeting the guests and laughing with my uncles, my mother looked straight at me and blinked 3 times, slowly. It wasn't random. It was our childhood signal. We only ever used it when something was very wrong, when we couldn't say it out loud. And in that moment, standing there with everyone clapping and congratulating her, I understood something no one else did. My mother wasn't celebrating. She was asking for help. Before I tell you what actually happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. When my father passed away 3 years ago, my mother changed. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but slowly. She became quieter. The house felt different without him. Dinner conversations were shorter, and the television stayed on late into the night just to fill the silence. For months, she refused to even talk about meeting someone new. She would say, "Your father was enough for one lifetime." And I believed her. But loneliness is a heavy thing. It doesn't arrive with noise or warning. It just sits beside you every evening and refuses to leave. About a year ago, she mentioned a man from her community group. His name was Daniel. She described him as kind, helpful, a good listener. At first, I didn't think much of it. She deserved companionship. She deserved to laugh again. The first time I met him was at a small cafe. He stood up when I arrived, shook my hand firmly, and looked me straight in the eye. He said my mother talked about me all the time. He remembered small details about my job, my husband, even my favorite dessert. It was impressive. Maybe a little too impressive. But after everything my mother had been through, I didn't want to be the suspicious daughter, so I pushed that thought away. Over the next few months, things moved quickly. He started visiting often, then staying over, then talking about their future together. My mother looked happy again, genuinely happy. She began wearing brighter clothes, she laughed more, she started hosting small gatherings like she used to. It felt like light had returned to our family. 6 months later, she called me one evening, her voice full of excitement. He had proposed. I was surprised because it felt fast, but she sounded certain. She told me he made her feel safe. That word stayed with me. The wedding was small and private, just close family. He cried during his vows and held her hands tightly, promising to protect her. Afterward, everyone said the same thing. She was lucky. Maybe she was. After they married, she moved into his house. It was larger than ours and in a quieter area. He called it a fresh start. At first, everything seemed fine. She called regularly, sent photos, talked about future trips they wanted to take. But gradually, the calls became shorter and less frequent. Sometimes when I phoned, he answered instead. He would say she was resting and that he would tell her I called. When I asked her about it later, she laughed and said he was just protective. That word stayed with me, too. A few weeks later, she told me they were hosting a family party. Daniel wanted to properly introduce himself to the extended relatives. She said it was important to him that everyone saw how happy they were. The party was held at their house. There was music, food, laughter. Daniel moved easily through the guests, shaking hands, pouring drinks, telling stories like he had known everyone for years. He looked perfect. Too perfect. Then, while everyone was clapping at one of his jokes, my mother looked at me and blinked. Once, twice, 3 times, slowly. My heart stopped because that wasn't random. It wasn't nervous blinking. It was our childhood code. We only ever used it in very dangerous situations. 3 blinks meant one thing only. I am not safe. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe, but I forced myself to smile. If she used the signal, it meant one thing clearly. Don't react. So I didn't. I picked up a glass from the table, pretended to laugh at something my aunt said, and acted normal. Inside, though, I was fully alert. I started watching more carefully. Daniel never left her side. If she walked toward the kitchen, he followed. If someone asked her about the house, he answered before she could. When my uncle joked, "Take good care of our sister," Daniel squeezed her shoulder and said, "Don't worry, she's in very safe hands." Safe. There was that word again. At one point, I managed to stand beside my mother alone near the hallway for a few seconds. I whispered, "Mom?" She didn't look at me. She just said quietly, "Not now." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Before I could say anything else, Daniel appeared behind us with a smile and asked if everything was all right. I nodded, but something in his eyes felt sharp, like he was measuring me. Later that evening, I noticed something else. Every time my mother's phone buzzed, Daniel picked it up first. He checked the screen before handing it to her, and sometimes he didn't hand it to her at all. I watched her face during those moments. She didn't argue or complain. She just stayed quiet. That wasn't like her. My mother had always been strong and independent. She raised me to speak up, to never shrink myself for anyone. But that night, she felt smaller. As the party ended and guests began to leave, I hugged her tightly. She held me longer than usual. Very softly, so no one else could hear, she whispered, "Don't trust him." My heart started pounding, but her expression didn't change. She pulled away smiling just as Daniel walked toward us, thanking everyone loudly for coming. The perfect host, the perfect husband. On the drive home, I didn't speak for several minutes. My husband finally asked what I had seen. I told him about the blinking, the whisper, the way Daniel handled her phone. He didn't dismiss it or laugh it off. He just said quietly, "Then we don't ignore it." The next morning, I called my mother. Daniel answered. He said she was still sleeping and that she had been tired from the party. It was 10:30 in the morning. I asked him to tell her I called. He said he would. She never called back. That afternoon, I tried again. No answer. That night, I received a short text from her number. "I'm fine. Busy today. Talk later." Something about it felt wrong. The message was too short, too formal. My mother never texted like that. I showed it to my husband. He looked at me for a long moment and then said softly, "Either she's scared or she's being watched." And that was when I understood this wasn't just a strange feeling anymore. This was about control. That night, my husband and I made a decision. We weren't going to confront Daniel blindly. We needed proof. Luckily, my husband works in financial compliance. He deals with fraud cases every day, and he knows how to follow patterns without jumping to conclusions. Calmly, he said, "Let me look into him." The next morning, he started digging through public records, old addresses, and marriage licenses. It didn't take long before small cracks appeared. Daniel hadn't always been Daniel. 10 years ago, he had a different last name. 5 years before that, another variation. Then we found something worse. 2 previous marriages, both to widows, both ended quietly within 3 years. Both women sold property shortly before separating from him. There were large financial transfers, but no police reports, no lawsuits, just silence. My stomach turned. "This is a pattern," my husband said quietly. But suspicion wasn't enough. We needed something current, something that would protect my mother now. So I called her again. This time she answered. Her voice was low and careful. She said she couldn't talk long. I didn't ask direct questions. I just asked gently, "Mom, do you trust him?" There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "He says he owes me." My chest tightened. I asked what she owed him. She said he had spent money on the house and now wanted everything back. When I asked what everything meant, her voice shook. She said her savings, and then she mentioned the property my father had left her. My heart dropped. That property was my father's life savings, the house, the land, everything he had worked for. She told me that if she didn't transfer it to him, he would destroy her life. I asked how. After another long silence, she said something that made my blood run cold. He had recorded her. After my father died, she had been broken. She cried, she said things out of grief, things no one should hear in their most vulnerable moments. He had secretly recorded those conversations. Now he was threatening to edit them, to make her sound mentally unstable. He told her that if she refused to give him the money and the property, he would release the recordings and convince people she wasn't fit to manage her own life. This wasn't just manipulation. It was a trap, and my mother had been living inside it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. When I finally did, I asked why she hadn't told me earlier. She said she didn't want to worry me, and that he never left her alone long enough to talk freely. That was enough. 2 days later, my husband and I went to their house unannounced. Daniel opened the door smiling, as always. I told him we had just come to visit. He couldn't exactly refuse. Inside, I asked my mother to help me in the kitchen, while my husband stayed in the living room with Daniel. They talked casually at first. Then my husband mentioned, almost conversationally, that he works in financial investigations. Daniel's smile flickered. My husband added that he had recently been reviewing cases involving serial marriage fraud. The room went quiet. Daniel gave a nervous laugh and said he wasn't sure what was being implied. That was when I walked back in and placed printed documents on the table, old marriage records, name changes, property transfers. His expression changed completely. The charm disappeared. What was left was calculation. My mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. She reminded him that he had told her she owed him and that she would lose everything if she refused. Daniel tried to speak, but my husband calmly interrupted and said the authorities were already aware of his history. That wasn't entirely true yet, but it was enough. Daniel panicked. He grabbed his jacket, muttered something about a misunderstanding, and walked out quickly. 2 days later, we officially reported him. When authorities contacted the previous women, one of them finally agreed to speak. The pattern became clear. He targeted lonely widows, built trust, married them, isolated them, and then pressured them financially. My mother filed for annulment. He disappeared before charges were finalized, but this time he left with nothing. A week later, my mother came to our house for dinner. She looked lighter, almost like she could breathe again. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. It wasn't the danger signal, just a quiet thank you. And that's when I understood something important. Predators survive in silence, but families survive when they listen.